They say blood is thicker than water, but in my experience, blood is just easier to spill. My name is Wilma Jean Fay. I'm 72 years old, and I've spent 40 of those years building an empire from the red clay of South Carolina, only to have my own flesh and blood try to bury me alive. I was sitting on my veranda, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air, holding a piece of cardstock that felt like a blade. It was a wedding invitation. My only son, Julian, was marrying a woman named Vanessa Sterling. The Sterlings were new money with old-world cruelty, but it wasn't the gold-embossed lettering that made my hands shake. It was the sticky note tucked inside, written in Julian's hurried, careless scrawl. "Mama, please don't come. Vanessa thinks your presence will ruin the aesthetic of the photos. We'll have lunch next month." The aesthetic. That was the word he used to discard the woman who worked 3 jobs to put him through law school. I wasn't polished enough for the Sterlings. My hands were calloused from decades of managing properties, not from manicures and champagne flutes. "Is everything all right, Miss Wilma?" I looked up to see Sarah, my head housekeeper, and the only person in this house who actually looked me in the eye anymore. She saw the note. She saw my face. "He told me to stay home. Sarah," I whispered, the sting in my chest sharper than any physical pain I'd ever felt. "My own son, the boy I shielded from every storm, has decided I'm the cloud in his sunny day." "He's a fool, ma'am," Sarah said, her voice tight. "He's forgotten who owns the ground he's standing on." She was right. Julian lived in a penthouse I paid for. He drove a car with my name on the title. Even the ring he put on Vanessa's finger was a family heirloom, a 5-carat diamond that belonged to my grandmother. And yet, I was being removed from the guest list like a typo. I spent the next 3 days in a fog of silence, but on the 4th day, the silence broke. Vanessa called me. She didn't call to apologize. She called to demand. "Wilma," she said, her voice like glass shards. "I noticed you haven't RSVP'd. No, on the digital portal yet. We need to finalize the seating chart. And frankly, Julian is too stressed to deal with your guilt trips right now. Just stay in Charleston and enjoy your garden. We'll send you a video of the ceremony." "A video?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "You're banning the mother of the groom from the church?" "It's a high-profile event, Wilma. The governor will be there. We need a certain look. You understand, don't you? You're just so loud. Your clothes, your voice, your way. It doesn't fit the Sterling brand." The Sterling brand. She was talking about me, like I was a faulty product. I hung up without a word. I walked to my vanity and looked at myself. I saw a woman who had survived Jim Crow, survived a cheating husband, and survived a recession. I wasn't a brand. I was a powerhouse. That night, I didn't cry. I went to my office. I pulled out the original deeds to the Sterling family's ancestral estate, the very venue where the wedding was being held. The Sterlings didn't know I'd quietly purchased the holding company that owned their debt 6 months ago. They thought they were royalty. They didn't realize they were tenants. If Julian wanted a wedding without his mother, he was going to get exactly what he asked for. But Vanessa? She was about to learn that when you try to erase a woman like Wilma Jean Fay, you only end up highlighting her power. I called my lawyer, a sharp man named Quentin. "Quentin," I said, staring at the invitation one last time. "I need you to pull the leverage on the Sterling property. Every contract, every lien, every unpaid cent. And I want it ready by Saturday at 4 p.m. "That's the hour of the wedding, Wilma," Quentin noted. "I know," I replied, a cold smile spreading across my face. I want to see the look on her face when the aesthetic turns into an eviction. But I didn't know then that Vanessa had a secret of her own, one that would make my revenge look like child's play. When that bride stood up at the altar, She wasn't just planning to marry my son. She was planning to destroy us both. The morning of the wedding, Charleston felt like it was breathing through a wet blanket. The humidity was thick enough to choke a secret, and I had plenty of those to spare. I sat in my dressing room, staring at a gown I'd bought months ago, a deep, royal purple silk that shimmered like a bruise. I wasn't supposed to wear it. I was supposed to be at home, sipping tea and pretending my heart wasn't shattered. "Are you sure about this, Miss Wilma?" Sarah asked, her hands trembling as she fastened the pearls around my neck. "The Sterlings, they have friends in high places. This could get ugly." "Ugly is what they gave me, Sarah," I said, my voice as cold as a tombstone. "They wanted an aesthetic wedding. Well, I'm about to give them a masterpiece in reality." I climbed into the back of my black sedan. My driver, a man named Terrence, no, I'm sorry, his name was Xavier, knew exactly where we were going. The Magnolia Creek Estate. It was a plantation-style manor the Sterlings claimed had been in their family for generations. That was a lie. They'd leased it 10 years ago when their tech firm took off, and they'd been falling behind on the payments for 18 months. I held the deed in my leather briefcase like a loaded weapon. As we pulled up to the iron gates, the security guard looked at my invitation, the one Julian told me not to use. "Name?" he asked, leaning into the window. "Wilma Jean Fay," I said, sliding my dark glasses down my nose. "Mother of the groom. And the woman who pays your salary." He blinked, checked his clipboard, and saw my name crossed out with a red line. His face went pale. He knew who I was. Everyone in this county knew Wilma Jean Fay. He opened the gate without another word. The ceremony was being held in the sunken garden, a sea of white roses and overpriced champagne. I stepped out of the car, the purple silk snapping in the breeze. I didn't sneak in. I walked down the center aisle while the string quartet was playing a soft Mozart piece. The music faltered, necks craned. Whispers broke out like a wildfire in a dry forest. "Is that?" I thought she wasn't coming. "Look at her face. She looks like she's hunting." I saw Julian at the front, standing next to his best man. He looked handsome in his white tuxedo, but when his eyes met mine, his face drained of all color. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He stepped forward, his hands out as if to stop a runaway train. "Mama, what are you doing here?" he hissed, reaching the middle of the aisle. "I told you," Vanessa said. "I don't care what Vanessa said, Julian," I replied, my voice carrying just enough for the front 3 rows to hear. "I'm here to witness my son's biggest mistake, or perhaps his biggest lesson. Which one it is depends on you. You're ruining everything," he whispered, his eyes darting to the Sterling family sitting in the front row. "Please, just leave before she comes out. She'll lose her mind." "Let her lose it," I said, taking a seat in the very front row, right next to Vanessa's mother, Regina Sterling. Regina looked at me like I was a cockroach in a silk dress. "You weren't invited, Wilma. This is a private event." "Actually, Regina," I said, leaning in close so she could smell the expensive perfume and the cheap threat, "this is a repossession. But let's let the children have their moment first, shall we?" The bells began to chime. The guests fell silent. The heavy oak doors of the manor creaked open. And there she was, Vanessa Sterling. She looked like an angel in a Vera Wang gown, but I knew the devil was wearing that lace. She floated down the aisle, her eyes locked on Julian, until she saw me. She didn't trip. She didn't gasp. She did something much worse. She smirked. It was a look of pure, calculated triumph. She walked right up to the altar, took Julian's hands, and turned to look at me. The minister began the service, talking about love and honor, words that felt like insults in this garden of lies. When it came time for the vows, the air grew still. "Do you, Vanessa Sterling, take Julian Fay to be your wedded husband?" Vanessa didn't say, "I do." She let go of Julian's hands. She turned toward the congregation, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. She reached into her bouquet and pulled out a small, high-tech remote. Before we continue, Vanessa said, her voice amplified by the hidden lapel mic she was wearing, I think we should talk about the Faye legacy. Because Wilma here thinks she owns this estate. She thinks she owns this town. She clicked the remote. The massive LED screen behind the altar, intended for a montage of the couple's photos, flickered to life. But it wasn't photos of Julian and Vanessa. It was a video of me, in my private office, from 3 nights ago. The audio kicked in, loud and clear. It was me talking to my lawyer, Quentin. I want the Sterlings on the street by sunset. My recorded voice boomed. I want Julian to realize he's nothing without my bank account. If I have to burn the house down to show him who's boss, I will. The gasps from the audience were deafening. Julian backed away from me, horror etched into his features. Vanessa stood tall, looking like a martyr. She didn't come here to celebrate us. Vanessa cried out, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. She came here to evict my parents on my wedding day. She's a monster. The crowd turned. The charm of the Faye name was dissolving into scandal in real time. But as Vanessa smiled, thinking she checkmated me, she made one fatal error. She kept the screen running. And as the video continued, something appeared on that screen that Vanessa hadn't edited out, something that made my blood run cold, and the bride's face turned from white to gray. The air in the garden turned toxic in an instant. The video didn't stop where Vanessa intended. She had tried to paint me as a bitter, controlling matriarch. But as the clip played on, the camera in my office, a camera I didn't even know was there, captured something else. It showed a figure slipping into my study an hour after I'd left. The figure was wearing a dark hoodie, but the gait was unmistakable. They walked straight to my wall safe, entered the code with chilling familiarity, and pulled out a stack of documents. Then, the person turned toward the camera for a split second before the screen went black. It was Vanessa's brother, Silas Sterling. And in his hand wasn't just my property deeds. It was a ledger I hadn't seen in years. A ledger that contained the private financial records of half the city council. The congregation was in a state of whiplash. One moment I was the villain, and the next, a Sterling was caught on tape burgling my home. Julian looked between me and his bride-to-be, his jaw hanging open. Vanessa? Julian's voice was a thin wire, ready to snap. Why was your brother in my mother's safe? Why does he have her personal codes? Vanessa's martyr face vanished. Her eyes darted toward her mother, Regina, who was suddenly very busy looking at her manicure. Julian, honey, it's not what it looks like. My brother was. He was just making sure your mother wasn't planning anything illegal to stop our happiness. He was protecting us. Protecting us by stealing from my mother? Julian yelled, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the manor. I stood up slowly, the purple silk of my dress rustling like a warning. A certain aesthetic. Vanessa, is that what you call grand larceny and wiretapping? You didn't just want my son. You wanted my keys. You wanted the leverage I've spent 40 years building. I turned to the crowd, many of whom were the very city officials whose names were in that stolen ledger. Their faces were masks of terror. They didn't know if I was about to expose them or if the Sterlings already had. You see, I addressed the guests. The Sterlings didn't just lease this house. They've been using it as a base for a very different kind of business. One that involves recording every conversation held in these gardens. How many of you have sat in this very spot and discussed things you'd rather keep private? How many of you are on Vanessa's little cloud right now? The panic was palpable. People began to stand up, looking around at the trees, the statues, searching for hidden cameras. The wedding of the year was turning into a crime scene. Vanessa grabbed Julian's arm, her fingernails digging into his white sleeve. Julian, don't listen to her. She's manipulative. She set this up. She probably paid Silas to do that just to frame me. I paid your brother to rob myself. I laughed, and it was a sound that made Regina Sterling flinch. I don't need to frame you. Vanessa, you're a Sterling. You were born framed. I walked toward the altar, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble. I stopped inches from Vanessa. She was shorter than me, and up close, I could see the sweat breaking through her expensive foundation. Get out of that dress, I whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. It was paid for with a credit card backed by my estate. The pearls on your neck, my grandmother's. The shoes, my account. You are literally wearing my life, and you thought you could kick me out of the room? You can't do this, Vanessa hissed, her voice dropping the act. The Sterling name still means something in Charleston. It means evicted, I said, pulling a folded paper from my bodice and handing it to the minister. Sir, if you would be so kind as to read the header of this document. The poor man, shaking like a leaf, adjusted his glasses. It's a notice of immediate seizure and vacate order for the Magnolia Creek estate, effective 4 minutes ago. Julian looked at his bride, then at me, then at the chaos erupting around him. For the first time in his life, he saw the chessboard for what it was. He saw that he was a pawn being traded by a woman who didn't love him to a woman he had betrayed. Mama, Julian started, his voice cracking. Don't mama me, Julian, I said, turning my back on him. You chose the aesthetic. Now you get to live in the ruins of it. But as I turned to walk away, Vanessa did something no one expected. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She grabbed the heavy crystal unity candle holder from the altar and swung it. The sound of the impact wasn't what people expected. It wasn't me who fell. The heavy crystal candle holder didn't hit me. It didn't hit Julian either. As Vanessa swung with the jagged fury of a woman who had lost her throne, a body stepped between us. It was Sarah, my quiet, loyal housekeeper who had followed me to the wedding despite the ban, had moved with a speed I didn't know she possessed. The crystal caught her across the temple. The sound, a dull, sickening thud, echoed through the garden, silencing the murmurs of the socialites. Sarah collapsed onto the white rose petals, her blood blooming like a dark, unwanted flower on the pristine runner. Sarah! I screamed, dropping to my knees. My 72-year-old joints protested, but I didn't feel the ache. All I felt was the warmth of her blood on my hands. Vanessa stood over us, the crystal still clutched in her hand, her chest heaving. She looked down at the woman she'd just struck, and for a fleeting second, the mask of the Sterling brand slipped completely. It wasn't horror in her eyes. It was annoyance. She shouldn't have moved. Vanessa spat, her voice cold and trembling. She was just a servant. Why would she ruin my dress like this? The guests gasped. Even the Sterling's most loyal allies pulled back in disgust. But Julian, my son, who had spent the last year being molded into a spineless accessory, finally snapped. He looked at the blood on the floor, then at the woman he was seconds away from marrying. A servant? Julian whispered, his voice vibrating with a rage I hadn't seen since his father passed. Sarah raised me, Vanessa. She stayed late to help me with my homework when Mama was working 3 jobs. She's more of a lady than you'll ever be. Julian, don't be dramatic, Regina Sterling said, stepping forward to try and salvage the wreckage. It was an accident. The girl tripped. We'll pay for the hospital bill. Now let's get this ceremony finished before the press arrives. I looked up at Regina, my eyes burning. The ceremony is over, Regina, and so is your legacy. I turned my attention back to Sarah. She was breathing, but Her eyes were glazed. "Sarah, honey, stay with me," I whispered. But Sarah grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. She pulled me close, her voice a ragged wheeze that only I could hear. The basement, Wilma, under the wine cellar, the Sterling's tech firm. It isn't software. It's us. What are you talking about?" I asked, but her eyes rolled back, and she lost consciousness. The sirens were wailing in the distance. Someone had finally called the police. Vanessa tried to drop the crystal and blend into the crowd, but I stood up, my purple dress stained with the red of my truest friend. "Don't let them leave." I shouted to the security guards. Men I knew were on my payroll, not the Sterlings. "Lock the gates. No one leaves this estate until the sheriff arrives. You can't hold us here." Vanessa's brother, Silas, yelled, clutching the stolen ledger to his chest. "This is kidnapping. It's a citizen's arrest for assault, battery, and grand theft," I countered, walking toward him. "And if you don't hand over that book, Silas, I'll make sure the aesthetic of your jail cell is very, very permanent." As the police cars roared up the gravel driveway, the Sterling brand began to disintegrate. But as they handcuffed Vanessa, she leaned into my ear, her voice a venomous promise. "You think you won, Wilma? You think this is just about money?" She laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "Go look in that basement. Go see what your precious Julian has been helping us build for the last year. You aren't just losing your son to a marriage. You're losing him to a prison cell." I looked at Julian. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the ground, his face a mask of shame and something far worse, guilt. The police led Vanessa and Silas away, but the real horror was just beginning. I had the deed. I had the estate. But I realized I might have lost my son to something far darker than a gold-digging bride. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers danced against the white columns of the manor, making the whole scene look like a fractured disco. Sarah was being loaded into an ambulance, her face pale against the white sheets. I watched her go, a knot of cold dread tightening in my stomach. She'd risked her life to warn me about the basement. Vanessa was being led away in handcuffs, her Vera Wang gown trailing in the dirt, but she didn't look defeated. She looked like a woman who had already planted a bomb and was just waiting for the timer to hit 0. "Julian," I said, my voice cracking the heavy silence between us. "Look at me." My son stood there, his white tuxedo stained with Sarah's blood. He looked small. Not like the powerful lawyer I thought I'd raised, but like a boy who had broken a window and was waiting for the switch. "Mama, you don't want to go down there," he whispered, his eyes darting to the sheriff, a man named Silas. No, let's call him Sheriff Miller, who was busy cordoning off the garden. "I'm going down there, Julian, whether you're holding the flashlight or I'm doing it alone," I said. I didn't wait for his answer. I marched into the manor, the heels of my shoes echoing through the foyer that I now technically owned. The Sterlings had filled this place with modern art and cold, minimalist furniture, hiding the history of the walls. I found the door to the wine cellar behind a heavy velvet curtain. Julian followed me, his breathing heavy and ragged. It was supposed to be a data mining firm. Mama, that's what they told me. High-frequency trading. Legal loopholes. I thought I was just helping them secure the permits. "You're a Faye, Julian. You know, there's no such thing as a legal loophole that requires a hidden basement." I snapped, reaching the bottom of the stone stairs. The wine cellar was impressive. Thousands of bottles of vintage French wine, but I wasn't looking at the labels. I moved to the back wall, where the air felt cooler. I pushed against a rack of Pinot Noir, and with a low, hydraulic groan, a section of the wall slid back. The room beyond wasn't a cellar. It was a high-tech command center. Rows of servers hummed with a low, predatory vibration. Blue lights flickered in the dark, but it wasn't the technology that stopped my heart. It was the screens. Dozens of monitors lined the walls, each one showing a different bedroom, office, and boardroom in Charleston. I saw the mayor in his private study. I saw the judge who had presided over my husband's estate. And then I saw it, a folder on the main console labeled Fay Settlement. I clicked it. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the mouse. Inside were hundreds of recorded phone calls between me and my doctors, my accountants, and my private journals. They hadn't just been spying on the city. They had been building a digital cage around me. They were going to declare you mentally unfit. Mama, Julian sobbed, collapsing into a chair. Vanessa, she said you were becoming a liability to the family legacy. She said if we didn't take control of the assets, the state would. I signed the affidavits. I signed them last week. I turned to him, the glow of the monitors casting a ghostly blue light over my face. You signed your own mother's life away? For what, Julian? For a girl who would have replaced you the moment the ink was dry. I loved her, he screamed, his voice breaking. And she told me you were the one trying to cut me out. She showed me forged emails. Mama, she made me think you hated me. I looked back at the screen. There was a subfolder titled Sarah. I opened it. It was a log of every time Sarah had tried to warn me over the last month. The Sterlings had intercepted every note she'd left, every call she'd tried to make to my office. They had been gaslighting me, using my own son as the match. But then, a new window popped up on the screen. A live feed. It was the back of a van, the police van carrying Vanessa. She wasn't sitting in the back like a prisoner. She was holding a burner phone, and she was smiling. She's not going to jail, is she? I asked, a cold realization dawning on me. She has the keys to every closet in this city, Mama, Julian whispered. She's not a bride. She's a blackmailer. And she's about to release everything. Suddenly, the servers began to hiss. A red light started flashing on the console. Data upload. 85% complete. Vanessa wasn't just escaping. She was nuking the entire city's reputation, and she was framing the phase for the leak. The red light on the server racks was pulsing like a dying heart. Upload. 89% complete. My eyes darted across the monitors. If that bar hit 100, every secret in Charleston, every bribe, every affair, every hushed-up scandal would be dumped onto the public internet with a digital signature that pointed straight to my IP address. Vanessa hadn't just tried to steal my son. She was turning me into the most hated woman in the state. Julian, move. I shoved him aside and stared at the keyboard. Mama, it's encrypted. You can't just stop it, he cried, wiping tears and blood from his face. Vanessa has the master key. She's doing this from the transport van. I didn't spend 40 years outsmarting men twice as smart as you just to be taken down by a girl with a thumb drive. I growled. I wasn't a hacker, but I knew how systems worked. Everything has a weak point. Everything has a source. I looked at the thick bundles of fiber optic cables snaking along the floor. They led to a reinforced cooling unit in the corner. Julian, find me something heavy. A wrench, a pipe, anything. He froze, his lawyer brain still trying to find a proper solution. But the data, if we break it, we might lose the evidence against them. If we don't break it, we lose our lives. I screamed. I didn't wait for him. I grabbed a heavy bronze bust of the Sterling patriarch from a nearby pedestal, a man who looked as smug in metal as his descendants did in person, and I swung it with every bit of 72 years of frustration. The glass on the server rack shattered. Upload, 94% complete. I swung again. Sparking wires hissed like snakes. The smell of ozone filled the cramped room. On the monitor, the progress bar flickered. It stalled at 96%. Help me! I yelled at my son. Finally, the Fey fire lit up in his eyes. He grabbed a metal chair and began smashing the cooling intake. The machines began to overheat, a high-pitched whine filling the basement. Suddenly, the screens went black. The red light died. Silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. "Did we do it?" Julian panted, his hands shaking. "We stopped the leak," I said, leaning against the cold stone wall. "But we haven't stopped Vanessa." I looked at the master console. One screen was still flickering. It was the live feed of the police van. I watched as the vehicle pulled over to the side of a dark road. This wasn't the way to the station. The back doors opened. A man in a uniform, but not a local deputy, reached in and uncuffed Vanessa. She stepped out, smoothing her ruined wedding dress, and looked directly into the van's internal camera. She knew I was watching. She blew a kiss to the lens before the man handed her a fresh suit of clothes and a bag. "She's got people on the inside," Julian whispered, horror dawning on him. "Mama, the Sterlings aren't just rich. They're a syndicate. That data, they weren't just using it for gossip. They were using it to control the police, the courts, everyone. Then we stop being the victims and start being the hunters," I said, my voice hardening. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, leather-bound ledger I had snatched from Silas earlier in the chaos. He thought I was just arguing with him. He didn't realize I'd practiced the art of the pickpocket on the docks of this city before he was even born. I opened the book. It wasn't just names and numbers. It was a map to a property I didn't recognize. A hunting lodge in the Low Country registered to a shell company. "Julian, get in the car," I commanded. "Mama, we should go to the feds. We can't do this ourselves. The feds take weeks." "Vanessa is leaving in hours," I said, heading for the stairs. "And she still has my grandmother's pearls. No one takes my legacy and gets away with it." As we ran through the foyer of the now empty manor, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Attached was a photo. It was a picture of Sarah in her hospital bed, with a red X drawn over the image. The message read, "The aesthetic is about to get very bloody, Wilma. Stay home or she dies." My grip tightened on the phone. They thought they could threaten me with the people I loved. They didn't realize that a woman who has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. "Xavier," I shouted as we hit the driveway. My driver pulled the car around, his face grim. "Forget the speed limits. We're going to the Low Country." And Xavier opened the hidden compartment in the trunk. Julian looked at me, his eyes wide. "Mama, what's in the trunk?" "Vengeance, son," I said, stepping into the car. "The kind you can't find in a law book." The tires of my sedan screamed as Xavier pushed the engine to its limit, tearing through the moss-draped back roads of the South Carolina Low Country. The moon was a sliver of ice in the sky, barely illuminating the swampy marshes that bordered the private road to the Sterling Lodge. "Mama, please," Julian pleaded, his voice trembling as he looked at the dashboard. "You're 72 years old. You can't just storm a fortified lodge. These people, they've killed before to keep their brand clean. Then today is a good day for them to learn that the Faye name was forged in fire, not social media likes." I replied. I reached between the seats and pressed a hidden release. A panel in the floor shifted, revealing 2 matte black cases. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a set of blueprints and a thermal tablet. You think I stayed successful by just collecting rent? I own the company that installed the security systems for every major estate in this county, Julian, including this one. I tapped the screen. The lodge appeared in glowing orange and yellow. I could see 3 heat signatures in the main hall and 1 stationary and weak in the back bedroom. "That's Sarah," I whispered, my heart skipping a beat. They moved her. The ambulance wasn't an ambulance. It was a Sterling transport. The betrayal tasted like copper in my mouth. They had snatched my friend from the very garden where she bled for me. Xavier, stop the car half a mile out. I ordered. Julian, you're going to stay here and call the one man in the sheriff's department who hasn't been bought. Deputy Miller. Tell him if he wants to be the next sheriff. He needs to be at these coordinates in 20 minutes with the real state police. And you? Julian asked. I'm going to go collect my pearls, I said, stepping out into the humid night air. I didn't head for the front door. I slipped through the tall grass, my purple silk dress now ruined, stained with swamp water and grease. And I didn't care. I reached the external breaker box. I didn't cut the power. That would trigger the backup generators. Instead, I plugged a small device into the data port. Vanessa wanted a digital war. I muttered, let's see how she likes a system override. In an instant, the smart locks on the lodge clicked open. The perimeter cameras began to loop footage of an empty forest. I walked through the side entrance, like I was walking into my own kitchen. The interior of the lodge was a temple to vanity. Vanessa was standing by a roaring fireplace, despite the heat. She had changed into a sleek black jumpsuit, the fey pearls still wrapped around her neck. Her brother, Silas, was frantic, typing away at a laptop. The servers are down. Vanessa! Silas yelled. We lost the upload at 96%. The feds are going to have enough to link the encryption back to our father's firm. Then we burn the evidence, Vanessa said, her voice devoid of any emotion. And we start with the housekeeper. Once she's gone, it's Wilma's word against ours. And who's going to believe a grieving, demented old woman? I wouldn't call myself grieving, just yet, I said, stepping out of the shadows. Vanessa spun around, a silver pistol appearing in her hand as if by magic. Silas jumped, nearly knocking over his computer. Wilma, Vanessa hissed, a wicked grin spreading across her face. You really are a glutton for punishment. You walked right into a kill zone. No, Vanessa, I said, holding up the ledger. I walked into a closing. You see, this hunting lodge was used as collateral for a loan your father took out 10 years ago. A loan that was bought by Fay Holdings last month. You're trespassing on my property. And in South Carolina, we have very specific laws about how to handle intruders. I have a gun. Vanessa laughed, leveling the barrel at my chest. You have a piece of paper. I have something better than a gun, I said, pointing to the ceiling. I have the guest list. Suddenly, the massive speakers in the room erupted. It wasn't music. It was the audio from the basement, the recording of Vanessa and Silas discussing the blackmail, the framing of Julian, and the plan to remove me. What is this? Silas screamed, covering his ears. It's a live broadcast, Silas, I said, my voice cold. I didn't just stop the upload. I redirected it. Every word you're saying right now is being streamed directly to the local news station and the state attorney's office. You wanted a high-profile wedding? Well, you're having a high-profile downfall. Vanessa's face contorted with a primal rage. She didn't care about the stream. She didn't care about the law. She lunged at me, the pistol raised to strike. But she forgot one thing. She was wearing my grandmother's pearls. And those pearls had a very specific, very fragile silk thread. Vanessa charged at me like a cornered animal, her eyes wide with a manic desperation. She didn't want the money anymore. She wanted to see the life leave my eyes. She swung the heavy pistol toward my temple. But I didn't flinch. I reached out and grabbed the one thing she thought was a trophy. The Fay pearls. I didn't just pull them. I twisted the hidden filigree clasp, a secret my grandmother taught me when I was barely 10 years old. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a weighted tool. With a sharp practice snap, the silk thread didn't break. It uncoiled. The 5-carat diamond pendant at the end became a heavy, swinging pendulum. As she lunged, I pivoted with a grace my 72-year-old bones shouldn't have possessed. I swung the weighted pearls, catching Vanessa squarely across her wrist. The bone cracked with a sickening pop. The pistol clattered to the floor, sliding across the polished wood. Vanessa let out a piercing scream, clutching her arm as she stumbled back into the fireplace mantel. You old witch, she shrieked, her face a mask of agony. That old witch built this town while your parents were still trying to figure out which fork to use at dinner, I said, my voice steady and low. Silas, seeing his sister down, panicked. He scrambled for the gun on the floor, but I was faster. I kicked the weapon under a heavy mahogany dresser. Don't even think about it, Silas. I warned. The police are already at the gate. My son is with them. And unlike you, my son actually knows how to follow the law when it counts. You think you've won? Silas laughed hysterically, backing toward the rear of the lodge. We still have the woman. The help. If we're going down, she's going with us. There's a gas line leak in the back bedroom. Wilma, one spark and your loyal little shadow becomes ash. My heart stopped. I didn't care about the ledger, the pearls, or the sterling brand anymore. I turned and ran toward the back of the lodge, my lungs burning. Sarah! I screamed. I burst into the bedroom. The smell of sulfur and gas was overwhelming. Sarah was zip-tied to a heavy brass bed frame, a piece of duct tape over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror, tracking a small, flickering candle sitting on a precarious stack of books just inches away from a leaking valve. I dived for the candle, my fingers brushing the flame, just as it began to tip. I smothered the wick with the hem of my purple dress, ignoring the sting of the heat on my palms. Darkness swallowed the room, but the danger was still there. The hiss of the gas was deafening. I've got you, Sarah. I've got you. I whispered, fumbling with the zip ties. Outside, the sound of crashing glass and shouting erupted. State police. Hands in the air. I felt the zip ties give way. Sarah collapsed into my arms, sobbing quietly. I pulled her toward the window, kicking out the screen to let in the fresh, humid air of the marsh. It's over, honey. It's over, I told her. But as I looked back through the door into the main hall, I saw the final act of the Sterling tragedy. Vanessa wasn't surrendering. She had found a backup flare in the emergency kit by the door. She stood in the center of the room, the red light of the flare casting long demonic shadows across her face. She looked at the police. Then she looked at me through the bedroom doorway. If I can't have the Faye legacy, she shouted over the sirens, then no one will. She didn't throw the flare at the police. She threw it toward the basement stairs, the source of the main gas line. No. Julian's voice screamed from the front entrance. I shoved Sarah out the window into the soft grass and scrambled after her just as the floor beneath us groaned. The world didn't just explode. It roared. A wall of heat threw me backward, the shock wave knocking the breath from my body. I lay in the grass, the orange glow of the burning lodge reflected in my eyes. The aesthetic was gone. The Sterlings were gone. But as the smoke cleared, I saw a figure crawling out of the wreckage, clutching something to their chest. It wasn't a person. It was the server, the one piece of evidence that could either save my son or destroy him forever. The heat from the explosion felt like it was trying to peel the skin from my face. The Sterling Lodge was no longer a monument to vanity. It was a roaring pyre of cedar and secrets. I pulled Sarah further into the shadows of the willow trees, my eyes fixed on the crumbling front porch. Through the thick, oily smoke, a figure stumbled out. It was Julian. His white tuxedo was scorched black, and his face was smeared with soot and blood. In his arms, he wasn't clutching a family heirloom or a bag of money. He was holding the scorched, heavy chassis of the master server, the heart of the Sterling blackmail operation. He collapsed onto the gravel driveway just as the roof of the lodge gave way with a thunderous crash, sending a fountain of sparks into the night sky. Deputy Miller and a swarm of state troopers rushed toward him, but Julian didn't look at them. He looked at me. "I got it, Mama," he croaked, his voice raw from the smoke. "The encryption keys, the logs of what they made me sign. It's all in here." I walked toward him, my legs feeling like lead. I looked down at my son, the man I thought I'd lost to the Sterling's poison. He had risked his life to save the very evidence that proved his own involvement, just so he could clear my name. "You almost died for a box of wires, Julian," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and relief. "I almost died for a lie, Mama," he replied, coughing as a medic began to wrap him in an oxygen mask. "This is the only way to set it right." As the medics tended to Julian and Sarah, the police were dragging two zip-tied figures toward the transport vans. Silas Sterling looked broken, his expensive suit in tatters. But Vanessa was different. Even with her arm in a makeshift sling and her face covered in ash, she was laughing. It was a dry, rattling sound that cut through the noise of the fire engines. "You think you've won, Wilma?" she shouted as they shoved her toward the van. "Check the server. Go ahead. See what's really on there. I didn't just record your enemies. I recorded your friends." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I walked over to the server, which was now sitting on the tailgate of a forensic van. A technician was already plugging in a portable power source. "Wait," I said, my hand stopping the technician's arm. "I want to see the last file accessed." The screen flickered to life, showing a distorted, heat-damaged interface. The last file wasn't a bank statement or a video. It was a scanned document dated 40 years ago. My stomach did a slow, agonizing flip. It was a birth certificate. I stared at the names on the paper. My name was there as the mother, but the father's name wasn't my late husband. It was a name that would dismantle the very foundation of the Fey Empire, the name of the man who had been the Sterling's biggest rival, a man whose estate I had inherited through a legal battle that lasted a decade. If this became public, every cent I owned, every property I managed, and every bit of Julian's future would be legally void. I hadn't just built an empire. According to this document, I had stolen one. I looked up and saw Vanessa watching me through the window of the police van. She knew. She had found the one skeleton I thought I had buried deeper than the South Carolina silt. She had planned to use this to blackmail me into silence forever, and even now, with her world in flames, she was holding the match to mine. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Fay?" Deputy Miller asked, stepping up beside me. "We need to log this as evidence for the state attorney." I looked at the screen. I looked at Julian, who was watching me with pride, thinking we had finally escaped the darkness. If I let this server go into evidence, I would be a free woman, but a penniless one. My son would be the heir to a scandal, not a legacy. My fingers hovered over the format command. "Mrs. Fay," the deputy repeated, his brow furrowed. The choice was simple: the truth and total ruin, or a final, ultimate lie to protect the Fay name. I looked at Vanessa one last time. She was smirking, waiting for me to break. "No problem, deputy," I said, my voice as hard as a diamond. "I was just making sure the aesthetic was perfect. I didn't press format. I pressed send. But I didn't send it to the police. I sent it to a private, encrypted cloud that only I could access. Then I turned to the technician. "The heat must have fried the drive," I said, my face a mask of perfect innocence. "It's completely blank." I watched the technician's face as he ran a diagnostic. "She's right. The data's gone. The magnetic fields from the explosion must have wiped it." Vanessa's scream of rage from inside the van was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. She had lost her leverage. She had lost her crown. And she had no idea that I was now the only person on earth who held the key to the real Fae vengeance. But as the police drove her away, I realized the war wasn't over. Someone else was standing at the edge of the woods, watching the fire. Someone who hadn't been on the guest list. The embers of the Sterling Lodge were dying, leaving nothing but a skeletal frame glowing against the pre-dawn sky. The police sirens were fading into the distance, taking Vanessa and her hollow threats with them. Sarah was safe, and Julian was being treated, but the weight of that digital secret, the truth about the Fae lineage, burned in my mind hotter than the fire. I turned away from the wreckage and walked toward the edge of the dark woods where I'd spotted the movement. My purple dress was shredded, my skin was soot-stained, and my grandmother's pearls were wrapped tight around my fist like a knuckle duster. "You can come out now," I said to the shadows. "The show is over." The figure stepped into the moonlight. It wasn't a Sterling henchman or a federal agent. It was Quentin, my lawyer. He looked immaculate, as always, but his eyes were fixed on the burning ruins with a chilling neutrality. "You handled that with your usual flair, Wilma," Quentin said, his voice smooth. "But we have a problem. You didn't just wipe a drive. You tried to redirect a stream. And I'm the one who manages your servers." I felt the air grow cold. "You saw the file, didn't you, Quentin? The birth certificate?" "Yes. The fact that Julian is the biological son of your greatest rival, the man whose fortune you claimed." "Yes." Quentin stepped closer, his shadow stretching over the scorched grass. "It's a beautiful piece of history, and a very expensive one. If that ever went public, the Fae name wouldn't just be, it would be extinct." "What do you want, Quentin? Money? You've been on my payroll for 20 years. "I don't want your money, Wilma. I want your seat," he replied, a slow, predatory smile creeping across his face. "I want to be the chairman of Fae Holdings. You retire, citing the trauma of this wedding, and I take over. If you refuse, that file finds its way to the governor's desk by breakfast." I looked at him, the man I had trusted with every legal secret I owned. He thought he had me cornered. He thought he was the one holding the leash because he knew my past. But he forgot that I didn't just survive the past. I conquered it. "You think you're the first person to try and blackmail me?" I laughed, and the sound made him pause. "Quentin, I knew you were skimming off the escrow accounts 5 years ago. I let you do it." "Why?" "Because a lawyer with a vice is a lawyer I can control." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. A new video began to play, not of the wedding, but of Quentin's own private office. It showed him meeting with the Sterlings 3 months ago, handing over the very safe codes Silas had used to rob me. "You weren't my lawyer, Quentin. You were their inside man." I hissed. "You helped them set up the blackmail because you wanted a bigger slice of the pie. But you made one mistake. You underestimated my aesthetic." Quentin's face went gray. I can explain that." "Explain it to the sheriff," I said, pointing behind him. Deputy Miller was standing there, his arms crossed. He had heard every word through the open line on my phone. "Quentin Reed, you're under arrest for conspiracy, embezzlement, and accessory to kidnapping," as they cuffed my lawyer and led him toward the same fate as Vanessa. Julian walked up to me, leaning on a crutch. He looked at the smoking ruins of the lodge, then at me. "Is it really over, Mama?" he asked, his voice weary. "It's over, Julian," I said, taking his hand. "The Sterlings are gone. The rats in our own house are being cleared out. And the Fae name? It's stronger than ever." I looked at the sunrise breaking over the marshes. I had the file. I had the power. And most importantly, I had my son back. The secret of his birth would stay with me. A final piece of leverage to ensure that no one ever dared to challenge the Queen of Charleston again. I reached up and touched the 5-carat diamond on my grandmother's pearls. It was scratched, but it was still shining. Just like me. Vanessa Sterling thought she could erase a legend. She thought I was an easy target, a relic of an era that had no place in her digital world. But she forgot that the older the lioness, the sharper the claws. As I sat in the back of my car, driving away from the ashes, I looked at the news on my phone. The Sterling brand was being dismantled in real time. The Faye vengeance was complete. My son was a hero, my friend was safe, and my enemies were in chains. They wanted a wedding to remember. I gave them a funeral they'll never forget. If you want to see more stories where the underdog becomes the ultimate powerhouse, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Don't forget to smash the like button and ring the bell so you never miss a moment of the vengeance you crave. Leave a comment below with the word Queen if you think Wilma did the right thing. Your support is what keeps this channel alive. Thanks for watching Vintage Vengeance, where the past always comes back to haunt the present.